though who the heck is going to suggest that that's not there? I say it because I have had some very telling experiences that tell me that if people don't read it, they don't get it. A graduate student from the University of Toronto recently published an op-ed in the, I believe it was the Toronto Star, in which she cited, and it could have been the Globe and Mail to be honest, in which she cited that there were two very different approaches taken recently to the reality of gender-based violence in our schools, the reality of the prevalence of sexual assault, sexual harassment. She cited an example of the CAMH study and the fact that they speak to issues of preventiveness. And then she cited our report and said we came up with sniffer dogs and better locks for doors. If that's what you took from the 5 volumes, then it's one of two things. You can't read, or you don't want to read. We consider the issue of preventive measures to have been the hallmark of our work. Yes, there are security realities within our schools that I was fervent in insisting we had to address, that we couldn't shrink from it, we couldn't be cowards. This isn't a political exercise. It wasn't politically popular for me in progressive groups or the left to talk about sniffer dogs in schools. And who the hell cares whether it's politically popular? We have to balance protecting youth today and creating a better environment tomorrow. Youth aren't at risk today. The accident happened. What are we doing in the schools today to protect our youth? We have to make sure that the youth tomorrow are youth who get better help. We have to make sure that the youth tomorrow, in representing the disengaged population today, can be re-engaged. None of that happens if you don't take resources like this one and read them. The exercise becomes futile. And to that graduate student who didn't bother to read the work, a key message from me. The multiple recommendations in our report and the entire chapter dedicated to gender-based violence represents, and I say it completely self-servingly, represents one of the most in-depth reviews of gender-based violence in our schools today out there in Canada. But you have to read it. You have to read it. There are 13 recommendations, but they have to be implemented. The reality we face is that political paralysis manifests itself in ways that are akin to shadows. And so you end up struggling with shadows. As the chair of the panel, I can tell you that leaving my ego out of it, which is very difficult, but leaving my ego out of it for a moment, I found simply attempting to respond to some of the concerns around the report akin to swinging at shadows. The only time the Minister of Education has publicly commented on the report in any substantive way, whether I agree with it or not is irrelevant, but in any substantive way, was in a newspaper article dated January 19th, 2008. It was a column, Marie Campbell's column in the Globe and Mail. This is 4 months ago. That is the last time the Minister of Education commented at all on the report, and it happened to also be the first time in any substantive way. Quote, "I don't think the report was set up to be a rigorous research project. You have to see it in that way. What is extraordinary about that comment, given as it was in the context of referring to survey work headed up by Professor Scott Wortley of the University of Toronto, our principal academic for the panel and who also happens to be a key player in the McMurtry Curling Roots of Violence project, a criminologist, sociologist whose survey work is in some of the highest demand in this country. What happens to be surprising about all that is the minister in no way explains what she means. Fighting with shadows. What we realized in the issuance of this report is that ultimately any news that's bad news that affects more than a narrow, disengaged population, that might affect their premises, their paradigms, and that is the paradigms of the affluent, the paradigms of the powerful, and the paradigms of the engaged. Any message that negatively impacts their world and their view of the world stands high risk of being attacked, and attacked politically, not attacked through foundation. And so to this day, April 26, 2008, the minister has never explained what about the Wortley survey work in the two schools was substantively problematic. The minister has never explained what it is they intend to do in response to the recommendation that her government appoint a provincial safety and equity officer. The minister has never explained why the government has not created an implementation task force group that we recommended, and we recommended be chaired by your next speaker, Judy Finley, former child advocate. The minister has explained none of these things. The reality is, and it makes some sense from a political point of view, is if you ignore something long enough, it might go away. My view is the stakes are way too high for this kind of politics. What is it that has so alienated or